Well, today was an exciting day. Several weeks back, God had laid on my heart to do a message on suffering, on the concept that suffering is a constant in people's life, that we deal with suffering on a regular basis, and that we ask the question, why does suffering happen all the time? And the thought and the focus was to say we shouldn't ask that question. It's the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, what are we suffering for? So the message is called Suffering for Good, and it's from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 18. And that notion of being compassionate and to be a blessing to the people, to suffer for good. If you're going to suffer, you might as well suffer for good. And if you're doing good, no one can stop you. And that was the theme for today, and God knew He was up to, because I guess the Hot Fudge Sunday today, I'm going to tell you a little story about a man named Pat. Pat came into the office right about 5 or 10 minutes before the worship service started, and Pat was in a bad way. Pat had been living at the Salvation Army, and he wasn't going to be staying there anymore. And he couldn't be staying anymore for whatever reason. And so he was on the verge of being homeless again, as he said. And his whole point was that there is no God, and there is no hope. So he might as well just slit his wrists and go jump off a bridge. His exact words were, "I'm not afraid to die, I'm afraid to live. Because what do I have to live for?" This was overwhelming at the time, because it was right before worship service. So I asked him, I begged him to please stay for worship, because we had to go and do the worship service. And he did. He did stay for the service, and I had texted some friends and saying, here's my situation. And about halfway through the service, they showed up. They came in, and it was a blessing to have them, because in after church we could sit down with them. And through the three of us, we got to a real clear place that he wasn't going to go willingly. He wasn't interested in any help. In fact, he just wanted to die. And so we called the authorities. The police came, and they had a conversation with him, and they took him, Baker acted him, and he went willingly. By the time they came and everything happened, he went willingly. So I'm hoping that there was for him, a little bit of an answer of a prayer, maybe, that he was suffering. He was suffering, and there's so much of his story that I totally get. He was running into dead ends. He wasn't getting help. At least in his opinion, he wasn't getting help. And so he said, "What do I have to look forward to? I have to look forward to leaving here, and tonight I've got to sleep behind a bush, or I got to sleep on a bus bench, because there's no place for me to go." And he said, "I don't want to do that anymore." He's born in 1963, so he's 50-some years old, and he said it's just been a hard life, and that process for him of suffering was so much different than, like, for me in my life, and the suffering, and maybe for you, and what you have experienced in your life. But suffering is suffering, and the focus is how can we do that next right thing. How can we be a blessing in the midst of that? How can we make the choice to suffer for good? And Pat's suffering. And so for you watching this, I ask that you pray for Pat. I know I will be. And hopefully that the prayer is that he makes a connection somewhere, and he's able to get some help and find some hope. Even if he doesn't get all of his answers, that he finds some hope. My prayer is that as he was driving away in that squad car today, that he realized that there were three people that cared enough about him that they spent some time and they made some calls, and they wanted to help him. And so I hope that's what he sees. But suffering is such a relative thing, and it's a perspective thing. I have never suffered in my life the way that Pat has suffered, but I've had sufferings too, and I'm sure you have. And the message and the lesson through Pat and through 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 18 is making the choice of what we're going to suffer for. And suffer for good. Suffer for good instead of suffer for evil or suffer for bad. All of our decisions have consequences, so we might as well make good decisions and suffer the consequences that way. doing that next right thing. And I guess that was the piece that I took from today and my experience with Pat.